Richard Haass joining us now from New York. Richard, one of President Biden's initial goals was to push for the release of the hostages. There were actually some glimmers of hope negotiated, we have been reporting, through Qatar. Now all of this is on hold, and they still haven't gotten the humanitarian aid in. And I've been told they not only thought they could get the aid in, at least coming out of this Arab summit today, but also get a path for continuing to get aid in, limiting civilian casualties from the Israeli side, and potentially some conversation about the future of leadership in Gaza if they were to, weeks, months from now, as Israel hopes, eliminate the Hamas.
Lance, your questions of the hostages and aid are obviously going to be affected by the fact that there's a war going on. And it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get this sorted out, because that's the reality. My own view, and maybe a controversial one, I think this idea of trying to come up with an alternative leadership in Gaza, however desirable it is a pipe dream. I just don't see the Palestinian Authority having the will or ability to step in. It can barely run the West Bank. The Arab governments are uninterested in playing a larger role. No UN agency can. So I think at the moment, as awful as Hamas is in so many ways, I think that they're an unfortunate fact of life. So the question is, can you get aid in to reach the people who need it? Can you perhaps bring about some type of exchange of hostages for prisoners? But I think the real issue is going to be, how does Israel carry out what it believes to be necessary military operations in the wake of October 7th? At the same time, there's going to be growing pressure for a ceasefire, in part to get hostages out, in part to get food in part because of the reaction to yesterday's incident at the hospital.
Richard Haass, thank you so much for your expertise on all of this, because I want to bring in Leon Panetta, former Defense Secretary, CIA Director, member of Congress, and White House Chief of Staff. President Biden, Leon, saying that Defense Department data makes him confident that Israel was not behind the hospital blast. First he said apparent, then he expressed more confidence. The NSC put out a statement. What do you make of all that?
Well, it's obviously important if we have intelligence and Pentagon information that this was in fact a jihad missile gone astray. I think that's really important. We're probably going to continue to see incidents like this take place as the war heats up. But it is really important that the public know the facts, and hopefully the indication here will send a clear message that that right now a lot of very innocent Palestinians are deeply at risk.
And at this point, is it risky for the U.S. president to be declarative about what happened, to be going to Tel Aviv with the Arab street, increasingly inflamed, European allies concerned, and protests, one terror incident already in Brussels, threats in France? How successful do you think, I guess the bottom line is, how successful do you think he could or should be in getting Israel today during that war cabinet meeting? Clearly this conversation took place to limit the ground offensive and try to target their campaign and avoid civilian casualties as much as you can in urban warfare.
I think it's very important, and it's certainly part of the role of the United States as a world leader to try to express not just the support for Israel, but the support for humanitarian aid and trying to do everything necessary to provide medicine, food, and shelter to those Palestinians who are obviously going to be victims as a result of this war. I think President Biden is providing that voice. There's not a lot of other voices out there right now that are talking about some kind of moral leadership at a time of serious warfare involving Israel and Hamas. And I think he's got to be that voice. And so I'm glad he went there. I'm glad he indicated that the United States is going to continue to support Israel, but he also indicated that it is very important that Israel not just be consumed by anger, but that it exercise the kind of responsible approach that involves respect for international law and the rules of war.
And what's your level of concern about the clashes along the Lebanon-Israel border? Hezbollah has declared a day of anger or rage today, the protests that have spread, and the announcement that 2,000 U.S. troops are deploying not for this engagement, but to the region. And we've got one and on the way another carrier battle group in the Eastern Med.
And Andrea, this is a dangerous moment in this war. The United States obviously has deployed 2 carrier fleets to the Mediterranean, now sending 2,000 Marines and sailors to that part of the world, which represents an important step towards trying to provide some meaningful support, hopefully military support, but also other support at this point in time. And there's no question in my mind that right now, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Iran are basically sitting back to determine what happens as Israel decides to move into Gaza. And, how horrific is that going to be in terms of its impact on civilian casualties? Is it going to be more measured? I think that will tell us a lot. If in fact it's a full-scale invasion into Gaza, I think there's a very good chance that this war is going to expand and that Hezbollah will enter the war. Whether Iran does or not, they basically operate as always through proxies, and they'll probably continue to do that. But there's no question that right now, I think there is a real danger of escalation in this war because of those that play a part in determining whether or not there'll be continuing warfare in that region.
And at that point, what is the engagement of the U.S. and what is the prospect of getting hostages out? We thought we had a chance at some progress yesterday.
Yeah, it'll be much more difficult, obviously, to be able to retrieve those hostages. I mean, I do think that Israel has got to define what are the primary objectives here that they want to achieve, and it's still not very clear. I think if, in fact, this is about undermining Hamas, going after its leadership, destroying their command and control, then that ought to be clearly stated as the objectives and goals. And frankly, if that is the goal, then I think there are ways to be able to accomplish that don't involve necessarily a wholesale invasion of Gaza. We faced the same situation after 9/11 as to how we were going to go after the terrorists who attacked us. And the way we approached it was to define where the targets are, where the leadership was, and to go after that leadership. I think Israel ought to have the ability to do the same thing with regards to Hamas.